amazing stamina, built-in sense of identity, and an awareness of what her responsibilities were.
She really believes in bright colors because she has said, I need to be seen to be believed, and she knows she's a diminutive person. So when she goes out, she's always in that monochromatic pop of color.
We've had a matriarchy for 7 years. You don't kind of move on from that very quickly. A monarchy really works well with a woman at the helm.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. Queen Elizabeth II has died. Her Majesty became Queen on February 6, 1952, after the sudden death of her father, King George VI. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years until his death in April of 2021. Her passing brings the second Elizabethan era to a close, a reign marked by a sense of duty and service to others. On today's show, we take a look back on the Queen's life and legacy. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
In 1952, Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne. By 2015, she'd earned the distinction of longest reigning British monarch, surpassing Queen Victoria's of 63 years, 7 months, and 2 days. During her reign, she worked with 13 Canadian prime ministers, 14 U.S. presidents, and 7 popes. From visiting more than 120 different countries to giving royal assent to more than 3,500 acts of parliament, her successes were endless. But above all, that the Commonwealth stands ever taller, growing from just 8 members to 54 today, has been the Queen's crowning achievement.
Joining me now is a man who has served 4 governors general and lieutenant governors and has helped organize royal visits since 1978. Richard Berthelsen, it is good to have you here as we talk about this massive moment in history. It's a profound moment, and it's not a surprise when someone of that age, she was 96, suffers poor health and eventually passes away. And yet it came with such a suddenness, and maybe it's because she was working up until 2 days before she passed.
Yeah, we should have known. Many of us thought that the Queen would not outlast Prince Philip by more than 2 or 3 years, given the closeness of their relationship and their bond. And of course, because we did see her performing her constitutional duty on Tuesday with a smile and with her usual, dignity, it just did not seem it was possible. But obviously, events moved quickly. The Queen obviously has been suffering ill health, maybe of a greater degree than we had been made aware over the past year since she was hospitalized for unknown causes last October. And I think in the end, she was happy to go in her beloved Scotland at Balmoral Castle, one of her own private homes, one of her favorite places on earth, as her grandchildren have remarked, and a place that was very close to her and Prince Philip, and also a place they had honeymooned, a place where she spent the early days of the Second World War to be safe away from London. There's just so many connections with that place. And the Queen has a great deal of affection for Scotland. And I just find it so fitting that that was where her life ended.
Absolutely. It is hard to distill 70 years, Richard, but we are left with a reflection of the life that was led. And as you reflect on her life and legacy, what do you think of? What has she meant to you?
Well, I think the Queen has been an incredible sign of constancy and stability in a real dramatically changing world. The world has just completely changed beyond any recognition of what it was like when she succeeded to the throne in 1953. It was a black and white world with very little television or media, and now we are living in the complete opposite of that, in an instantaneously changing world. And I think the Queen has seen us through decades of change and decades of turbulence in a way that we always didn't realize. Who cannot forget her recent speech at the start of the COVID outbreak, where she reminded us that we will see our families again, we will see our friends again, we will meet again. Those words were inspirational to so many people, not just in the UK, but in Canada and elsewhere. Who can forget her grandmotherly tone when she spoke of Diana's death the day before her funeral, and she calmed the situation down. And I don't forget when she said in Canada, after the Meech Lake Accord failed in 1990, I am no fair weather friend of this country. Of course, I'm here in good times and bad. So all of these things and many more were really pivotal things that defined the Queen. And I think really, for me, said what the institution is all about. There she was meeting a prime minister on Tuesday, who was born in 1974. Her first prime minister was born in 1874. What a breadth of knowledge and wisdom the Queen has accumulated.
You mentioned the word constant, Richard, and it's so true. She was a constant figure in our lives for 70 years. Prime ministers, presidents, popes, they've all come and gone, but the Queen has always been there. So maybe talk a little bit about the change that this represents. What will this loss mean for people, not only across the UK, but Canada and beyond?
Well, I think a familiar figure who was there. For some of us, we thought of her role in government and in maintaining parliamentary democracy and as a symbol of parliamentary democracy in the Commonwealth and countries like Canada. But for other people, she existed in popular culture, as a figure sometimes of a bit of satire. And you could always count on the Queen showing up with a hat in some kind of, really vivid color, with her gloves, collecting flowers. I mean, it seems otherworldly. And that kind of monarchy has really ended for now, because the Queen was the last of her generation. She set the standard for what it meant to be a constitutional monarch in this era. She had to be seen, she said, to be believed. And I think her connection with people throughout the Commonwealth in so many ways, through trains and automobiles and planes, and in Canada, even dog sleds and all sorts of other devices to move around amongst people. And of course, her famous walkabouts. Many people have personal memories of the Queen. And I think for many, it's like a very loved family member, perhaps in another country, perhaps a great-grandmother, an aunt or a great-aunt. If that person's gone, and it's a real sense of loss, and people are really feeling it today.
It's so true. I think a lot of people didn't realize how much she meant to them until she passed. Now, our thoughts at some point must turn to the future and to King Charles III, which he will now be known as. He will have to reign, obviously, within the constraints of the constitutional monarchy, but he is not his mother, and he will have his own style. Where do you see the direction of the monarchy going?
Well, it's going to be a different kind of monarchy. Our next three monarchs will be kings. So it's going to be a very different kind of approach. It's going to be a patriarchal system. We've had a matriarchy for 70 years. You don't kind of move on from that very quickly. A monarchy really works well with a woman at the helm, I find. And for half of our history in Canada or more, that's been the case, thanks to Victoria as well. So it's going to be a very different kind of monarchy. Obviously, we're not going to have these touchstones in terms of the way the Queen carries herself. But Charles is a figure who has come into his own in recent years. He's been in now an incredibly happy marriage for longer than he was in a sad marriage. And he's really put an imprint on certain issues. He is not going to be able to address those issues with the degree of directness that he has in the past. He's going to have to really work behind the scenes, and he's going to have to work, I think, in the footsteps of his mother as a very impartial constitutional monarch. It's also a transitional reign. It's going to be a short reign from him to his son, Prince William. So it's going to be a very different kind of thing. It's a smaller royal family. It's going to operate differently, and it's going to take some time to find its feet. And I think we are starting to see that with his remarks on Friday evening.
Richard, before I let you go, what lies ahead? What will we see in the coming days?
On Saturday, we have the formal accession of Charles's reign beginning, his proclamation both in London and in Ottawa, which is a formal recognition of a legal step that's already taken. In fact, he already has been king since the moment of his mother's passing. We're going to see great ceremonial and fanfare as the Queen's body is moved from Balmoral to Edinburgh, lying in state in the Scottish capital, coming to London, the people filing past in the great Westminster Hall, a state funeral like we have not seen for many, many decades at Westminster Abbey, probably on Monday, September 20th. And all the while, we're going to see Charles stepping up as king, visiting people in their communities and visiting the different parts of the United Kingdom to really both accept condolences and put a human face on the monarchy and console the people, because that is going to be a very essential moment right now in the absence of the Queen, who people would normally have turned for consolation in a moment like this. Charles is going to fill that gap in the next 10 days. And how he does that is going to really set up how successful he will be as king.
Absolutely. All right, Richard Berthelsen, it is always good speaking with you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Stick around. We'll be right back with more of the Zoomer. Welcome back to our special coverage of the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. Earlier this year, I spoke with former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, David Onley, Dr. Carolyn Harris, and Nathan Tidridge about the Queen's historic 70-year reign. Here's that interview now. I want to start by rolling some tape because this is a pledge Queen Elizabeth, then Princess, made at the time of her 21st birthday. So let's roll that.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
David, I'll start with you. How true was she to her word?
Oh, absolutely, completely true. And imagine this was when she was 21. Now, I'm not sure what you were doing when you were 21. I was at Scarborough College. I think I was fretting and worrying about whether or not a girl I had my eye on was going to go to an event with me, and what I was going to do in terms of selecting courses for the fall. And that was about it, Of course, I wasn't sitting there as she was, with the understanding, and she would have known this from a child, basically, that upon the death of her father, she would become the monarch. And, none of us at all have had that sense of responsibility on our shoulders, say from, early teenage years where it would really start to sink in. But there she was, making that declaration.
It's so true. You know, Carolyn, she's such an institution. It's easy to forget that she wasn't supposed to have become queen at all. Take us back to, when she began her momentous reign.
Well, when Princess Elizabeth was born in 1926, she was the eldest granddaughter of King George V and Queen Mary, but her father, the Duke of York, later King George VI, was the second son, not the eldest son. And at that time, it was still expected that the baby princess's uncle, the future Edward VIII, might marry someone suitable and have children of his own. And of course, if Princess Elizabeth's parents at that time had a son, he would supersede his sister in the succession. So there were all sorts of different possibilities for Princess Elizabeth, where she might have been a cousin or a sister of a monarch rather than the monarch herself. But with the abdication of her uncle Edward VIII in 1936, her father becomes King George VI, the name George VI symbolizing continuity with George V, and the public eye is very much focused on Princess Elizabeth. She had a younger sister, Princess Margaret, but it was fairly clear there was not going to be a younger brother, and that she was the heiress presumptive to the throne. She did not expect to become queen as early as she did.
Right.
Her father, King George VI, suffered from lung cancer, but when Princess Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, left for Kenya in 1952. He was there at the airport waving to them. So it came as quite a shock when they received the news, February the 6th, 1952, that it was time to return to the United Kingdom.
And she was so young, Nathan. Carolyn touched on it, but is there anything in her life that could have possibly prepared her for something so monumental? Was she prepared at the time? Obviously, it came sooner than she thought.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very young age to be making such an oath. But I mean, the tradition in the family would have been to prepare for a life of service. And that apparently she had a very close relationship with her father, and that he was preparing her for that. But again, it was much too soon.
David, the Queen spent a lot of time here over the last 70 years. She's made no fewer than 22 visits to Canada, as I understand. What would you say was her most significant visit to the country?
Wow, it's very hard to say. I suppose the last one, because people were aware I mean, it just coincided with my term as lieutenant governor. But she was at an old enough age that there was active conversation as to whether or not this was likely to be her last visit, and that turned out to be true. Now, Prince Philip came back one more time, but I think everyone perceived that this was her last visit. Still a woman of amazing stamina. My wife and I, along with Premier McGuinty and his wife and other dignitaries, were at Pearson Airport on the tarmac. It was a blisteringly hot day while she departed and got on the Canadian government jet. And I recall vividly how we departed ourselves, went to grab a quick bite to eat, and then head home, respective homes. And when we got home, I turned on the TV set, and there she was, speaking live at the UN. And I just shook my head. I thought, wow, what stamina this person has to wrap up the tour, get changed on the plane, get to the UN, and then give an address. And as Nathan just said, it is this built-in sense of identity and an awareness of what her responsibilities were.
All right, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back on the other side. Welcome back. In a speech marking the 40th anniversary of her accession to the throne, Queen Elizabeth described 1992 as an annus horribilis, a Latin phrase which means horrible year. 2 royal divorces, the publication of Diana's tell-all memoir, A Fire at Windsor Castle, but worse was to come. 5 years later, on August 31st, 1997, Diana was killed in a car crash. There's no question, Nathan, that these were some of the most tumultuous years of her reign. In your view, how was she able to steer the family and the monarch to calmer waters?
Well, I think it goes right back to that speech that she made 75 years ago, where she centers service and service to others. And she's this kind of steadfast rock at the center of it. And by keeping that focus and very honestly pursuing that focus, she kind of kept the ship afloat as it navigated through those waters. I mean, that's part of the royal family. They're a family. And but unlike our families, their trials and tribulations are public, and they become public property very quickly. And so not only is she having to be head of state of the UK and 13 other nations, she's also having to be head of a family, and all of it is in front of the camera.
David, how would you say Diana's death in particular impacted the monarchy and the royal family?
Yes, it's a very good question, because in the immediate days after the death, the severe criticism from the public that the royal family and the Queen in particular were not appropriately mourning the death of Diana. And, outside of the fictional treatment, there's certainly enough documentary evidence, memoirs, etc., that the Queen took that all into account and gave an address that was very appropriate for the times, and made that subtle but very important, if you call it mid-course correction, in the portrayal of emotions, the portrayal and the exhibition of concern to others. I mean, we know that the Queen had demonstrated that on various occasions, in moments of national tragedy in the UK. But this was very different, because it was the wife of her son and the mother of her 2 grandsons.
You saw those pictures of the Queen there when the casket was going by and she was bowing her head. Well, of course, the Queen bows to no one. Now, almost 30 years later, Carolyn, her lifetime of public service is facing another test. Yes, she just lost her husband, but Prince Harry and Meghan have laid bare their rift with the royal family in an interview with Oprah. Her son, Prince Andrew, is embroiled in scandal. How would you say these things are threatening the institution?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that both Prince Harry and Prince Andrew are second sons. They are not directly in line to the throne. So there's been a very strong emphasis in the royal family's public image on continuity and on the senior members of the royal family, as the press has been very focused on Prince Andrew's legal settlement, Harry and Meghan stepping away from their duties as senior members of the royal family. And it seems that in response, there has been this focus on the direct line and the royal family's immediate future.
But she still faces challenges. Nathan, the move by Barbados to remove the monarch as head of state has sparked questions over how a monarch can continue to oversee a Commonwealth agitating for change.
Well, you have to take it on a country by country basis, because each country that recognizes the Queen as the head of state is an independent Commonwealth realm, and so completely politically, militarily untethered from the United Kingdom. For this country, for Canada, we're the only member of the Commonwealth that is constitutionally entrenched the crown, the monarchy, in our democracy. So as far as the longevity of the institution, in an age where democracy seems to be under threat, Canada remains I think a dedicated constitutional monarchy. The institution has served the country very well, so well that in fact that it's entrenched at the very core of our system of government.
Okay, and I'll get reaction from David and Carolyn as soon as we come back from this short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The modern Commonwealth and Queen Elizabeth grew up together. She made the Commonwealth her priority, and under her stewardship, it grew from just 8 members to 54 today. It is arguably her crowning achievement. So, David, talk a little bit about the Queen's role in the Commonwealth and how it's evolved to where it is today.
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head in terms of just the pure mathematics of it, growing from 8 nations to 54. And you see the difficulties and the bitterness that exists between nations on the planet. You have to say to yourself, well, okay, so it's an old style entity. There's no powers that it has to enforce rules or regulations, but these are interacting nations who are not at war, and frankly setting a strong example for the rest of the nations on the planet. Does that make the situation in the Middle East any better? No. Does it make the Russian-Ukraine situation any easier to untangle? No, it doesn't. But it does set an example of what is possible.
Now, we saw the Commonwealth tour taken by William and Kate most recently, Carolyn, and it was reported in the media that there was this sort of semi-colonial feel to it. It did receive a lot of criticism, particularly the images of William and Kate on top of a Land Rover sort of waving. So, you know, I'm curious your reaction to that trip, how you felt about it.
Royal tours often harken back to previous tours, and we see that in speeches where there's allusions to relationships that were formed with people or institutions in previous tours, previous generations of the royal family who were present. So that scene at the military review on a Land Rover waving to the public, that scene was meant to be reminiscent of the Queen and Prince Philip previously having used that same vehicle on their Caribbean tour in the 1950s. So this was meant to honor the Queen's Platinum Jubilee by having one of those set piece events associated with the Queen's reign. But unfortunately, in the 2020s, the optics of some of these particular set piece events that have been hallmarks of the royal tour do not go over as well, particularly in the press and with some commentators analyzing these visits. So we noticed with Charles and Camilla's recent tour of Canada, the focus was very much on what's topical in 2022, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, climate change in the Arctic, opportunities for young people and veterans, meeting with Ukrainian Canadians at this time when Ukraine is facing this invasion by Russia. So we see that there's more of an emphasis as the Platinum Jubilee tours unfold on current events rather than as many of the big set pieces that have been hallmarks of previous royal tours.
I think it's also important for us to keep in mind that those events are done at the request of the hosting government. So that royal tours are designed, constructed by the government who hosts them. So the request to inspect the Jamaican Armed Forces, use of the Land Rover, and all of the details of that event would have been done by the Jamaican government. And it's for the members of the royal family to follow the advice of their governments. It's the same thing with the Prince of Wales here. He can't come to Canada unless he's invited to by the government of Canada. And the tour itself and the details and the people that he meets are really in the control of the government. Which particularly with Indigenous folks, I think is problematic and something that needs to be addressed here in Canada.
David, do you think that we'll see more countries go the way of Barbados? I mean, it's one thing to be part of the Commonwealth, of course, but to have the Queen as their head of state.
I think there's a certain degree of inevitability, but what it really comes down to is that in terms of Jamaica and in terms of Barbados and the other Caribbean nations, we're just dealing with not two levels of government. We're dealing with one elected level of government. And to remove the Queen as head of state in those nations, it's a simple, straightforward vote up and down, yes, no, just like any other piece of legislation in those countries. In Canada, it's a very different situation where to remove the Queen or the King as head of state requires unanimous approval of not only the 10 provinces, but the territories as well, and a majority vote in the House of Commons. So you just have to say to yourself, is there a single person alive who can remember any issue whereby all 10 provinces and the federal government have all agreed on anything? And the answer is no. So I would think that there would be others in the years ahead, but perhaps not as many as people might think.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. David Onley, Carolyn Harris, Nathan Tidridge, it's good to have you. Suzanne Boyd, editor-in-chief and publisher of Zoomer Magazine and everythingzoomer.com is up next. Welcome back to our special coverage of the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. Earlier this year, I sat down with Suzanne Boyd, editor-in-chief and publisher of everythingzoomer.com and Zoomer Magazine. Take a look. So first of all, does the Queen hold the record for most Zoomer Magazine covers?
Absolutely, and shouldn't she? She's the Queen.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these covers. Do you remember this one?
This one, yes. This is an exciting cover because this picture I'd never seen before. Celebrating one of her, she's had so many anniversaries and so many milestones, but one particular one, they invited a bunch of Commonwealth photographers to photograph the Queen, and one of them happened to be Bryan Adams, who is also the great rock star, but also a fabulous photographer and also a contributing editor at Zoomer. And we had already ran the photograph of her sitting in the mudroom laughing, and the Queen never laughs. You don't see that often. And we had run that as an exclusive earlier on. And when Prince Philip was about to retire from royal life, her strength and her stay, as she put it, and Bryan said, well, I have another picture of her with Prince Philip from that shoot. And I said, you do? Like, what? And he goes, well, I wanted her standing behind him because that's how he was represented in life, 2 paces behind. And I said, that's so lovely. Would you do me the great honor of allowing me to publish this photograph? And he agreed to do it. So I really loved this one. It was such a gentle, it talked about their royal love story. Romancing the Throne was the cover line, and that one was close to my heart. I thought it was very sweet.
Well, let's talk a little bit about her legacy. 7 decades on the throne. What would you say is her greatest achievement? Like when you think back on her history, what will you remember?
I think preserving the monarchy and making it relevant, keeping it relevant, as she hands it off to Charles. And I think, there was very touch and go during her reign. The Diana situation almost toppled the monarchy. She had to pivot really quickly with the Prince Andrew and the Harry and Meghan leaving situation, which brought up the, the whole question of colonialism and racism, which is, let's face it, a lot of what the British Empire was built on, and the monarchy represents the British Empire. So I think she's been very nimble during her time by preserving the institution of the monarchy and the customs, but being able to pivot when she needed to.
You're so right. Even when she inherited the institution, it was pretty vulnerable, right?
Yes.
And so what are some of the ways, like let's drill down on that. What are some of the ways she was able to modernize the monarchy, to keep it relevant, to your point?
Well, I think the first thing she did was be completely authentic all her life, be true to herself. So when she gave that speech at 21 from South Africa, that famous speech that for as long as I live, my duty I will serve you, and she actually did that. She never stopped doing that job. And I think, but she knew, I think the biggest sign when she knew things had to change was after the Annus Horribilis, during the Annus Horribilis, as she called it, when Windsor Castle burned down, after 3 of her children's marriages had broken up, even though she's the head of the Church of England and they don't believe in divorce, and that sort of thing. She agreed to pay taxes, because when Windsor Castle burnt down and people saw all those great, paintings and all the richness that was flowing out of Windsor Castle, and the royal family paid no taxes, she's one of the richest women in the world, then she agreed to pay tax. I think the other thing she did was after the brouhaha with Diana and the royals staying up in Scotland and not coming down and speaking to her people, the flag wasn't up at Buckingham Palace because she wasn't in the palace, but the crowd took it as, why aren't they lowering the flag for Diana? So she came down from Scotland and she put the flag up and lowered it. But then when Diana's casket went by on the way to the funeral a week later, she actually stood outside and bowed her head to the casket. The Queen bows to no one. And then shortly after that, her mother died. Then the crowd again was on her side, and she won them back over.
Well, you mentioned the 90s and the fire at Windsor Castle, the royal divorces,
yes,
and then, of course, the death of Princess Diana.
Yes.
What do you remember in the aftermath of that event?
Just how shocking the whole outpouring of emotion from the British public was, because, there's always been the stiff upper lip, keep calm and carry on. And it's like the whole country had a nervous breakdown. And then the rise of Tony Blair, because when he came out in front of the cameras and talked about the people's princess, then that really cemented him as a man of the people too. And he sees the narrative from the royal family. And I think that was really the ascension of Tony Blair as a cultural figure, as a social figure.
Now, I want to play you a clip that our colleague Libby Znaimer did with the author of the Palace Papers, Tina Brown, and then I'll get your reaction. I'll get your reaction when we come back. So let's roll that clip.
In my book, I talk about the refrain at Buckingham Palace after Diana's death was never again. And by never again, they meant we do not want to have somebody who comes in and becomes so powerful and so with her popularity and so famous and celebrated that essentially she's bigger than the monarchy. And that's what was happening. That did happen with Diana.
So Diana was out there. She had her own power base. And then 20 years later, Meghan comes along with her own celebrity appeal. Do you think to some extent when she came along, there was an element of she was doomed from the very beginning just because the royals had worked so hard to get beyond that celebrity factor?
I think it was unfortunate that the royal family didn't use that celebrity and charisma because, we're not celebrities is their mantra, because we're about duty and service. And even the Queen, she signed her last statement, your servant, Elizabeth. I mean, it's that bowing backwards to say we're not privileged. But the fact is we do live in a celebrity culture, which is personality driven. And the Queen herself is a celebrity. That's why she jumped out of the plane with James Bond at the London Olympics. She was playing off her celebrity for brand Britain, obviously. And I think what was really explosive about the Meghan thing was, apart from how well presented she was, her looks, the way she spoke, her communication skills, her obvious intellect, was also the fact with Harry, the playboy, dashing soldier prince, it became really combustible. And I think it was up to the royal family to harness that and use it to their benefit. And I think with the way their leaving went down, and I don't like to call it Megxit because it blames her, I like to call it Hexit. I do feel that if the royal family had just bent a little, because why couldn't they do the half in, half out, really?
Stay there. We'll be right back with more after this break. We're back with Suzanne Boyd, editor-in-chief and publisher of Zoomer magazine and everythingzoomer.com. Now, one of the most interesting evolutions of the Queen's cultural impact can be seen in the fashion industry. How did she put her stamp on fashion?
Well, she's done it all through her reign in different ways. So when she first became queen, she was the dashing, beautiful, young, waist-waisted, society beauty. And you have all those gorgeous, photos of her and Princess Margaret, mind you, in these beautiful Norman Hartnell gowns. They wore Christian Dior. And then her wedding dress, it started the craze of royal wedding dresses because it was right after the war, 1947, when she married the dashing, Greek heir, her distant cousin, mind you, Prince Philip. And that dress, because it was still wartime and rations, people were sending in ration cards. So, her cake could be made and the dress, she'd have the fabric for the dress. So her dress was a sensation. And in the 60s and 70s, she was very high fashion. You see her on these royal tours wearing turbans and cat-eye sunglasses and being very, very dashing and chic, the white gloves. And she did that for a couple of years. And then in her middle years, actually she came to Canada for one tour and she was considered dowdy. Everyone said she looked dowdy and tired. Oh. And that was in the 80s, 90s. And then after that, she just got this new look, which is the look we now remember. It's the monochromatic look, bright color. It's matching coat and dress, the shoes, which are handmade for her. And then broken in by her dresser, Angela Kelly, who wears them first.
So she has someone on her staff that wears her shoes first?
It's a woman called Angela Kelly, who is the keeper of the Queen's wardrobe, and she's very close to the Queen. The Queen has authorized her to write books, actually, about her style and her wardrobe. And one of Angela Kelly's jobs is to wear the shoes first. So when the Queen wears them and does the walkabouts, she doesn't get blisters, even though they're handmade and probably cost thousands of pounds. Her hat is never over a certain height, so when she gets into the car, it won't bounce on the top. But she really believes in bright colors because she has said, I need to be seen to be believed, and she knows she's a diminutive person. So when she goes out, she's always in that monochromatic pop of color. And it's created like, it's kind of Warholian, right? It's just the replica. It's iconic silhouette because you don't even have to see it, you just have to see the shape and there's the Queen.
Does she wear British designers?
She wears clothes that are made for her by Angela Kelly, and she has certain seamstresses that, designers, sewers, seamstresses, I don't know if that's the word you use these days, but who makes dresses under the direction of Angela Kelly. And they buy fabric that they have stored for like decades, and that's put down for when the Queen needs something made, and then they use that fabric.
People have surmised what she carries in her bag.
Right.
Do you know?
Well, we know for sure lipstick, because we've seen her take it out and put it on in public. Like ever so often she's sitting at she'll put on her lipstick, so we know that. They say not money, but she's been seen to actually buy ice cream for Prince Edward once using money from her bag. I think the most important thing about the bag is that it's always the same style, and I forget the name, but we have it, we know what it is. But she uses the bag to signal certain things. So if she wants to stop a conversation, she moves it up her arm. If she wants to leave an event, she puts it in a certain place. So she uses the bag as like her bat signal for her aides and her ladies in waiting to know when she wants to stop a conversation or go somewhere, which is kind of fun.
That is funny.
It's really fun.
She's a really interesting woman because she's been able to work well with 14 different prime ministers in Britain. What do you think that says about her character when we live in a world that's so divided politically, that she was able to work well with people of different political stripes for her entire life?
Well, constitutionally, they have to work with her, right? So, I think it's part of just the duty, and she's been known to put her thumb on the scale in certain political things where she lets it be known, or she says something in a walkabout, like with the Scottish independence referendum. Charles has gotten in trouble for writing letters to various cabinet ministers about politics, and it was revealed. But the Queen is, she's old school, never complain, never explain. She never speaks. She's never given an interview. She's spoken on camera, but she's never given an interview. So she keeps her own counsel. And the fact that one of the covers we had was her sitting at the desk with her famous red box, where she reads everything. And she's always been a working woman. She's been a working woman all her life, and she's committed to that, and that's her job, to deal with these prime ministers, give them advice and consent, and she's known to be very well informed.
Meanwhile, she is the paradigm of health and wellness. How has she changed the face of aging?
Oh, remarkably so, because that's one of the reasons I think our audience loves her. I think about 12 years ago, we did a story, The Secrets of Royal Longevity, and it's still one of our biggest. We update it every so often, obviously, along with all our other massive amount of royal content, but that's part of it. I mean, so right now, she's not doing certain things because of mobility issues, but she's still working.
Yeah.
Up to 2 years ago, even a year ago, she was riding horses, not side saddle, riding horses. Up to 3 years ago, we saw her driving herself around Windsor. So I think that's really part of the fascination. And, you know, she's lived this life as an outdoors woman. I think people say if she wasn't the queen, she'd want to be a country woman raising horses, right? So she walks, you know, she rides, she drinks barley water, apparently. That's why her skin's so good every morning. And I just living that idea, the Zoomer philosophy of engagement and wellness and being just part of the world around you and never sort of stopping, I think she personifies that.
Well, the death of Queen Elizabeth II brings to an end the longest reign in British history, spanning 7 decades of immense change. And though there were some bumps along the road, she pursued her role with dignity, humility, and always put duty first. This concludes our special coverage for this evening. Tune in Monday at 9 p.m. to theZoomer for additional coverage of the Queen's life, legacy, and the future of the monarchy. Thank you for watching. It's time to zoom out.